This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one country choosing the wrong friends. This is about something quieter and far more dangerous. There is a belief most systems rely on that if you stay neutral long enough, the pressure passes. That if you trade with everyone, no one will punish you. That ambiguity is safety. That belief is now failing, not loudly, not all at once. But mechanically, what's replacing it is a system that no longer tolerates the middle, where leverage doesn't wait for war, where markets enforce loyalty, where law, trade, and morality become instruments used selectively. You don't see this collapse announced. You feel it when choices disappear. If you think this only matters to governments, you're missing the signal. Because when systems lose patience with neutrality, they don't stop at borders. Stay with me. What controls this system now isn't ideology. It's something colder. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. What controls this system now is not diplomacy, and it is not ideology. It is exposure. Exposure to markets you cannot replace. Exposure to narratives you cannot outrun. Exposure to pressure that arrives before any formal conflict begins. Power no longer waits for treaties to fail. It moves through supply chains, through access, through permission. In this system, influence doesn't need to convince you. It only needs to make the cost of hesitation unbearable. This is the shift most people miss. Control has migrated away from leaders and into structures that don't argue. They calculate. You can believe one thing politically and depend on something else economically. But the system now reads that as a vulnerability. And vulnerabilities get tested. What looks like choice is often just timing. How long before the pressure becomes personal? How long before neutrality is reclassified as defiance? And here's the trap. The more you try to balance, the more visible you become, because the system is no longer asking who you support. It's measuring how exposed you are. And that measurement has consequences. There was a time when this kind of pressure moved slowly. Years, sometimes decades, before alignment was negotiated. Now it is inferred. Before ambiguity bought time. Now it shortens it. The silent shift is not about louder threats. It's about faster consequences. What changed is not intent. It's speed. Systems that once waited for declarations now act on signals. A vote, a port visit, a legal filing, a photograph. Individually, none of these mean rupture. Together, they form a profile, and profiles trigger responses. This is how slow change becomes dangerous, because nothing feels decisive while everything is cumulative. No alarms, no ultimatums, just a narrowing corridor of acceptable behavior. You're told this is flexibility, adaptation, strategic independence, but watch the pattern closely. Every attempt to stand between poles is quietly redefined as a risk to be managed. Not debated, managed. That's the shift from persuasion to containment, from partnership to exposure control. And once a system starts managing you, it stops asking what you intend to do next. It prepares for what it assumes you will. Then the system delivers a shock, not as a warning. As a demonstration, it arrives wrapped in procedure, in schedules, in announcements that sound routine. A joint action, a coordinated presence, a moment that is described as technical, but the reaction is immediate. Markets flinch before statements are issued. Diplomats speak before facts settle. Pressure begins before intent is explained. This is how you know it's no longer symbolic. What you're watching is not the event itself. It's the speed of response. Because the system has already categorized the move, already assigned risk, already calculated punishment, if you're thinking this is about provocation, you're behind the curve. Provocation requires interpretation. This is automated consequence. And here's the part that should bother you. The shock doesn't come from the action. It comes from what immediately follows it: the trade signals, the legal threats, the sudden talk of lines that cannot be crossed. Nothing has technically happened yet, but the cost has already been introduced. And once cost enters the room, choice starts to leave, because by this point, the mechanism is already in motion. This is where the system reveals how it actually works. Power is no longer exercised by forcing a decision. It's exercised by pre-pricing obedience. You are shown in advance what alignment will cost you and what resistance will cost you more. The system doesn't need you to comply publicly. It only needs your internal calculus to change. Who benefits from this is obvious. Actors with diversified markets, actors who can absorb friction, actors who can wait. Who absorbs the damage is quieter. Workers, export sectors, peripheral industries that never signed up for geopolitical signaling. This is why coercion now looks clean. No tanks, no ultimatums, just spreadsheets, risk models, and temporary measures that never quite expire. You're told this is stability, risk management, responsible governance. But look closer. The mechanism rewards those who can impose costs without feeling them, and it punishes those who feel costs before they even choose. That's not deterrence. That's preemptive discipline. And once discipline replaces negotiation, the next shock doesn't need justification. It just needs precedent. Then the pressure accelerates. Shorter windows, sharper language, less patience. Signals start stacking faster than explanations can keep up. A tariff threat here, a suspended meeting there, a warning framed as concern. Each move is small. Together, they compress time. There's no room to recalibrate, no pause to clarify intent. Every response is treated as confirmation. This is where escalation changes character. Not louder, faster. Decisions are forced by rhythm, not reason. You're responding to consequences that arrived before consensus. And notice what's missing. There is no final demand, because the system doesn't need one. It watches, it measures hesitation, it adjusts pressure accordingly. At this stage, even restraint becomes data. Even silence is read as signal. The danger isn't making the wrong move. It's realizing that waiting is now interpreted as resistance. And once resistance is assumed, the system stops nudging. It starts preparing. By now, this stops being abstract, because this is where you enter the system, not as a voter, not as a spectator, but as a variable. When markets tighten, jobs disappear quietly. When access narrows, prices rise without explanation. When pressure moves through institutions, it lands on households last and hardest. You're told these are unrelated events, temporary, external, but they share a source. They come from decisions made to manage exposure, and you absorb the cost of that management. This is how systemic pressure becomes personal, not through speeches, through paychecks, through uncertainty, through the slow realization that stability has conditions now, conditions you never voted on. If you feel like the rules changed without notice, that's because they did. The system didn't announce it. It implemented it. And here's the part no one wants to say out loud. Once everyday life becomes leverage, it's hard to tell where policy ends and punishment begins. If this feels familiar, if it feels close, don't look away. Share this, because understanding the mechanism is the first thing pressure tries to delay. What happens next doesn't stay contained. What happens next spreads outward, because systems like this don't stay local for long. Pressure moves, supply chains reroute, alignments harden elsewhere in response. One market closes, another recalibrates. One relationship phrase, others grow more conditional. This is the ripple most people underestimate. What begins as a bilateral issue quickly becomes a template. Others watch, others learn, Others adjust their own behavior preemptively, not out of loyalty, out of fear of being next, and that's how uncertainty globalizes. Rules stop feeling universal. They start feeling selective. Who gets punished? Who gets exempted? Who gets warned quietly instead of publicly? That ambiguity doesn't reduce risk, it multiplies it. Because when no one knows where the line actually is, everyone assumes it's closer than advertised. This is how blocs form without treaties, how alignment happens without declarations. Not through trust, through anticipation. And once anticipation replaces coordination, miscalculation becomes more likely than restraint. Nothing explodes yet, but the system is no longer stable. It's brittle. And brittle systems don't fail where you expect. From here, the future stops being linear. It fractures. There are 3 paths the system can take from this point. None of them are clean. The first is adjustment, quiet concessions, selective compliance, enough alignment to ease pressure without declaring surrender. The system rewards this for a while, but adjustment has a cost. It teaches the system that pressure works. The second path is erosion, prolonged tension, reduced access, slow capital flight. Jobs vanish one sector at a time. No single breaking moment, just decline normalized as resilience. This is the most common outcome and the hardest to reverse. The third path is rupture, a misread signal, a line crossed too publicly, a response that arrives faster than diplomacy can contain. Suddenly, pressure turns punitive, and choices disappear altogether. Here's the danger. These paths are not chosen deliberately. They are selected by momentum, by accumulated assumptions, by systems reacting to signals faster than humans can correct them. You don't wake up one day and choose rupture. You drift into it, and the system never tells you when the point of no return has passed. This is where the story usually ends. With reassurance, with a lesson, with the promise that someone, somewhere, is still in control. But that would be dishonest. Because the system I've been describing doesn't collapse dramatically. It narrows options. It narrows patience. It narrows the space between economic pressure and political obedience. And once that space is gone, what's left looks like choice but isn't. You won't be told when neutrality becomes unacceptable. You'll find out when the cost of maintaining it suddenly spikes. You won't see the line until you're accused of crossing it. That's the unresolved warning here. Not that conflict is inevitable, but that the mechanisms making it likely are already normalized. If you're still watching, don't stop here. Because this pattern isn't confined to one country or one bloc, it's moving. Follow it. Question it. And pay attention to who pays the price first. Subscribe. Share this. And stay with the next piece because the system doesn't pause and neither can understanding.